There are crimes that terrify you because they come from the outside. A stranger in the dark. A random act of violence. A moment of catastrophic bad luck. These crimes are horrifying, but they follow a logic we can accept. The world contains danger. We lock our doors. We teach our children about strangers. We understand that evil exists somewhere out there, beyond the threshold of home. And then there are crimes that terrify you in a completely different way, because they come from the person you are supposed to trust the most. In these cases, the danger is not a shadowy figure lurking in an alley. It is not a name on a registry or a face on a wanted poster. The danger is the person who packed your lunch, the person who tucked you in at night, the person who held you when you cried and promised that everything would be okay. The danger is the person who looked into a television camera, tears streaming down their face, and convinced an entire nation to pray alongside them. These cases do not just challenge our sense of safety, they challenge our understanding of human nature itself. Because if a mother, the archetype of protection, the symbol of unconditional love, can become the source of harm, then what can we truly trust? What relationships are safe? What instincts can we rely on? Tonight we are walking through 7 cases where the public story was a carefully constructed performance, where sympathy was weaponized, where the truth, when it finally surfaced, hit like a punch to the soul that leaves you gasping for air you cannot quite find. A warning: before we begin, this video discusses child harm and homicide. Nothing graphic, just the facts and the psychology behind how these nightmares unfolded. If you find value in understanding how evil operates behind closed doors, consider subscribing to Evil Minds Dwell Here. This channel exists to examine the architecture of cruelty, not to sensationalize it, but to understand it. Let us begin. Case 1. Susan Smith. The lie that weaponized a nation's prejudice. It began like every parent's worst nightmare given form. October 25, 1994, Union, South Carolina, a small town where everyone knows everyone. A young mother stumbles toward a house, pounding on the door, hysterical, barely able to form words through her sobs. Her name is Susan Smith, and the story she tells will captivate an entire nation. She says she was stopped at a red light when a man appeared at her car window. African American, armed with a gun. He forced his way into the vehicle and ordered her to drive. Miles later, he pushed her out of the car and drove off into the darkness with her 2 sons still strapped into their car seats in the back. Michael was 3 years old. Alex was 14 months old. The reaction is immediate and overwhelming. Yellow ribbons appear on porches across Union. Prayer vigils fill churches to capacity. The story makes national headlines within hours. The FBI mobilizes. Roadblocks go up across the state. A composite sketch of the alleged carjacker is distributed to every news outlet in America. Susan Smith stands before the cameras, trembling, pleading, begging whoever took her children to please bring them home safely. She looks directly into the lens, and her words become a desperate prayer broadcast into millions of living rooms. I just want to say to whoever has my children that they please bring them home to us. If you were watching back then, you probably remember how convincing she looked. The quivering voice, the wet eyes, the body language of a mother destroyed by grief and terror. America believed her. America mourned with her. America wanted to find the monster who had done this to her family, but investigators were starting to see fractures in the performance. The description of the carjacker was frustratingly vague. When pressed for details, Susan could not provide them. The location she identified as the scene of the crime was a red light that, according to traffic engineers, had never stayed red long enough for the events she described to unfold. Her emotional responses seemed calibrated, intense during press conferences, oddly flat during private interviews. And then there were the polygraphs. Susan failed them repeatedly. Each time she had an explanation: stress, medication. grief, but the needle kept moving in the wrong direction. Detectives began pulling on a different thread entirely: her personal life. What they found was a woman in crisis long before that October night. Susan was involved in an affair with a wealthy man named Tom Findley, the son of the owner of the company where she worked. She had dreams of a different life, a life of money, status, escape from the small-town existence that felt like a cage. But there was a problem. Tom Findley did not want children, not someone else's children anyway. Just days before her sons disappeared, Susan had received a letter from him that essentially said their relationship could not continue because he was not ready for a ready-made family. The motive crystallized with sickening clarity. Susan Smith wanted a new life, and her children did not fit into it. On day 9 of the search, 9 days of national prayer, 9 days of strangers organizing search parties, 9 days of a community holding its breath, police confronted Susan with the inconsistencies in her story. And she broke. There was no carjacker. There was no stranger with a gun. There was only Susan, driving to John D. Long Lake in the darkness, stopping her car on the boat ramp, releasing the parking brake, and stepping out as the vehicle rolled slowly into the black water with Michael and Alex still strapped into their car seats. She stood on the shore and watched the car sink, and then she ran to that house, pounded on that door, and began the performance of her life. 9 days, while the nation prayed, while volunteers searched. While her own mother wept on television, Susan Smith knew exactly where her children were. This wasn't just murder. It was theater, built on a racist lie designed to exploit America's prejudices and point blame at an imaginary black suspect. She weaponized stereotypes to protect herself, knowing exactly which buttons to push and which fears to manipulate. The case forces a question that still echoes. How well do we really know the people who share our homes, our beds, our lives? How easily can performance replace truth when we want to believe? Case 2. Diane Downs, the mother who could not stop smiling. Now imagine a different scene. A mother arrives at a hospital emergency room with her children. They have been shot. 1 is already dead. 2 are fighting for their lives, their small bodies torn apart by bullets. This is supposed to be a tragedy that destroys a parent, a moment so catastrophic that nothing will ever be the same. May 19, 1983, Springfield, Oregon. Diane Downs rushes into the hospital, her car carrying her 3 children, Christy age 8, Cheryl age 7, and Danny age 3. All of them have gunshot wounds. Cheryl is beyond saving. Christy and Danny are rushed into surgery with injuries so severe that survival seems almost miraculous. Diane tells police a story that sounds like rural horror. She was driving down a quiet road when a man appeared, bushy-haired and wild-eyed. He tried to carjack her. When she resisted, he opened fire on her children. He shot her too, grazing her arm, before disappearing into the night. That is the story. That is what she wants the world to believe. But people around her notice something deeply wrong. Diane does not behave like a mother whose child has just been murdered and whose other children are clinging to life. She is composed, sometimes eerily so. Hospital staff report that she seems more interested in discussing a married man she had been obsessing over, a man named Robert Knickerbocker, than in the condition of her surviving children. She asks nurses about visiting hours so she can schedule around her other activities. She talks about her own dating life while her daughter lies in a coma down the hall. And then comes the interview that becomes infamous in the annals of true crime. A local news station sits down with Diane Downs. The cameras roll, and what viewers see is something that does not compute. A mother discussing her children's shooting while smiling, calm and almost cheerful. She reenacts the crime like she is describing a minor traffic incident. At one point, she talks about her dead daughter Cheryl and then transitions without pause into discussing her plans for the future. The dissonance is so extreme that viewers call the station. Something is wrong with this woman. Something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. Investigators search her life and find diaries, pages and pages of obsessive writing about Robert Knickerbocker, resentment toward her ex-husband, and a theme that keeps repeating like a drumbeat: the children were in the way. They were obstacles to the life she wanted. They were burdens she could not shed. But prosecutors still need something more than diaries and disturbing behavior. They need proof. That proof comes from the one person Diane Downs did not manage to kill. Her daughter Christy survives, but with catastrophic injuries. She has been shot twice, including once in the chest. She suffers a stroke during surgery. For months, she can barely communicate. Her recovery is agonizing, measured in millimeters of progress. But slowly, through intensive therapy, Christy regains her ability to speak. And when a prosecutor gently and carefully asks her the question that everyone needs answered, Christy, the 8-year-old girl who has lost her sister and nearly lost her own life, gives an answer that stops time. Christy says, "My mom." 2 words. That is all it takes. The case stops being a mystery and becomes a nightmare with a clear shape. Diane Downs is convicted of murder and attempted murder. She is sentenced to life in prison. And the image that endures is not just the crime itself, it is the performance, the smiles that did not fit, the composure that did not make sense, the absolute confidence that she could out-act reality, that she could perform motherhood well enough to get away with destroying it. She believed her own story, and that made her terrifying. Case 3. Dee Dee Blanchard and Gypsy Rose. The prison made of love. If you ever wanted proof that abuse can wear a halo and carry a charity check, this is the case that proves it. For years, the story of Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard looked like an inspiration. A devoted mother, a chronically ill daughter, a community that rallied around them with the kind of generosity that restores your faith in humanity. Dee Dee Blanchard was celebrated as a saint. She had sacrificed everything, her career, her social life, her own health, to care for her daughter Gypsy, who was said to suffer from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, brain damage, and a constellation of other conditions that required a wheelchair, a feeding tube, and round-the-clock care. Gypsy could not walk, could not eat solid food, could not be left alone. Her teeth had been removed because of medications. Her head was shaved because of chemotherapy. She looked fragile, childlike, trapped in a body that betrayed her at every turn. The community responded with overwhelming support. Donations poured in. Habitat for Humanity built them a home, painted pink, Gypsy's favorite color. They received trips to Disney World, concert tickets, celebrity meetings. Dee Dee appeared in local news segments as an example of maternal devotion, but none of it was real. The illnesses were fabrications. The wheelchair was a prop. The feeding tube was unnecessary. The medications were creating symptoms, not treating them. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was a victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now formally known as factitious disorder imposed on another. It is a form of abuse where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention, sympathy, and control. From early childhood, Gypsy had been subjected to unnecessary medical procedures, forced to use mobility aids she did not need, fed through tubes that served no medical purpose. When she showed signs of health, walking when her mother was not watching, eating food she was not supposed to be able to eat, Dee Dee would escalate. More doctors, more symptoms, more control. Gypsy was a prisoner in a cage made of her mother's lies, and the lock on that cage was the entire world's perception of her as a helpless invalid. But then something cracked the walls. The internet. Specifically, online dating. Gypsy created secret profiles and began communicating with a man named Nicholas Godejohn. For the first time, she had a relationship her mother did not control, a connection to the outside world, a glimpse of what life might look like beyond the pink walls of her prison. The relationship escalated. Gypsy and Nicholas began discussing escape. And then the discussions turned darker. The only way out, they decided, was through. In June 2015, Nicholas Godejohn traveled to the Blanchard home. Gypsy let him in while her mother slept. He stabbed Dee Dee Blanchard to death. Gypsy and Nicholas fled. They were captured days later after a Facebook post from Gypsy's account said that "bitch is dead," and police began investigating. And then came the moment that stunned a nation. Gypsy Rose Blanchard stood up from her wheelchair and walked. Suddenly, the fairy tale collapsed into something far more complicated. Was Gypsy a victim? A murderer? Both? How do you assign moral responsibility to someone who spent their entire life being told they were dying, being denied education, being isolated from every normal human experience? If someone builds your entire world as a cage, if they convince you and everyone around you that you cannot survive without them, what does escape even look like? This case does not offer easy answers. It only offers the uncomfortable truth that abuse can masquerade as love, and that sometimes the line between victim and perpetrator is impossible to draw with a steady hand. Case 4. Lori Vallow. Daybell, when doomsday belief meets family annihilation. This case reads like a modern horror novel, except every word of it is real. For years, Lori Vallow appeared to be exactly what she presented: a devoted mother, a woman of faith, someone building a life centered on family and spiritual commitment. She had 5 children from multiple marriages. She attended church. She smiled in photographs with the easy confidence of someone who had found her purpose. Then she met Chad Daybell. Chad was a self-published author of religious fiction, but he had developed a following among people who believed he was something more: a prophet, a visionary, someone who understood the end times that were approaching and knew how to prepare for them. He and Lori connected over shared beliefs that would eventually curdle into something unrecognizable as faith. Their theology included a concept they called zombies. According to their worldview, certain people could become inhabited by dark spirits. These people were no longer really themselves. They were empty vessels controlled by evil. And destroying these vessels was not murder, it was liberation. It was righteousness. Then people around Lori and Chad began to die or disappear. First, Lori's estranged husband, Charles Vallow. He was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. The death was ruled self-defense. No charges were filed. Then, Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy. She died suddenly in her sleep. The initial ruling was natural causes. Chad collected the life insurance. 17 days later, he married Lori. Then, Lori's children, Tylee Ryan, 17, and J.J. Vallow, 7, simply vanished. When authorities started asking questions, Lori had answers. The children were staying with relatives. They were at a special school. They were somewhere else, always somewhere else. Always an explanation that dissolved under scrutiny. Meanwhile, benefits continued to arrive. Social Security checks for J.J.'s autism care. Money that required his existence. Money that funded Lori's new life with Chad. The lies accumulated. The pressure mounted. And finally, in June 2020, investigators obtained a warrant to search Chad Daybell's property. What they found buried in the backyard destroyed any remaining illusion. Human remains. Tylee and J.J. The children Lori claimed were safe. The children whose money she had been collecting. The children who had become, in her twisted theology, zombies who needed to be eliminated. The trials that followed exposed what prosecutors argued was the true engine behind the religious language. Not faith, but selfishness. Not righteousness, but greed. A desire for a new life, a new marriage, a fresh start, with the obstacles removed permanently. This case is terrifying because it shows how quickly belief can become a weapon. Call someone a zombie, and you are not just insulting them, you are stripping them of humanity. You are reclassifying them as something that can be destroyed without moral consequence. And once that reclassification happens, once a mother can look at her own children and see not faces she loved but vessels to be emptied, there is no limit to what becomes possible. Case 5. Lacey Spears, parenting for likes, killing for attention. This is the nightmare of the internet age given its most horrifying form. Lacey Spears built an identity online. Through blogs, through social media, through carefully curated posts, she presented herself as something specific, the heroic single mother of a chronically ill child named Garnett. And the content was relentless: hospital room selfies, updates from emergency rooms, detailed descriptions of Garnett's symptoms, his treatments, his brave little fight against a body that kept betraying him. The narrative was compelling: a mother sacrificing everything for her sick child, facing the medical system alone, never giving up even when the odds seemed impossible. Sympathy poured in. Comments, donations, the validation that comes from strangers telling you that you're strong, that you're inspiring, that they're praying for you. But doctors began noticing something that didn't make sense. Garnett's symptoms were strange. His sodium levels would spike to dangerous, sometimes near fatal levels that couldn't be explained by any known condition. He would improve in the hospital, then crash again. The pattern was erratic, unpredictable, medically inexplicable. The critical detail: Garnett had a feeding tube, a direct line into his stomach meant to keep him nourished and alive. When his sodium levels spiked yet again, the hospital made a decision. They installed hidden cameras, and they captured something that answered every question. Lacey, alone with Garnett, taking the feeding equipment into an unmonitored bathroom, emerging, and shortly afterward Garnett's condition plummeting. Investigators found bags of formula contaminated with salt. They found internet searches about sodium poisoning, how much was lethal, how quickly it worked, how it affected small bodies. They found a pattern that stretched back years, across multiple hospitals, multiple cities, multiple chances for someone to notice. Garnett Spears died at 5 years old. His mother had been poisoning him for most of his short life. And suddenly, all those blog posts read differently, not as documentation of a child's illness, but as the script of a manufactured tragedy. Every hospital photo, every tearful update, every prayer request, all of it serving not Garnett, but Lacey's need to be seen as devoted, heroic, worthy of attention. This case exposes something dark about the age we live in. Attention has become a currency. Sympathy has become a commodity. And for some people, the high of being perceived as a suffering martyr is worth any cost, even the life of their own child. The audience became accomplices without knowing it. Every like, every share, every comment telling Lacey she was strong, all of it fed the machine that was killing Garnett. Case 6. Casey Anthony. The case that ended without closure. 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony disappeared in the summer of 2008. That sentence should mark the beginning of a tragedy. Instead, it marked the beginning of one of the most controversial cases in modern American history, a case that would end with a verdict and no answers, a conclusion and no closure. What makes this case explode is not just the death of a child, it is the delay. Kaylee vanished in June, but the police were not notified until July, and even then, not by Casey. The call came from Casey's mother, Cindy Anthony, who had been desperately trying to locate her granddaughter for weeks, while her daughter offered excuse after excuse about why Kaylee was not available. During those weeks, Casey Anthony's behavior became impossible to reconcile with the image of a grieving, frightened mother. She went to parties, she posted photos of herself at nightclubs, she got a tattoo that read Bella Vita, the beautiful life. She lived as if her daughter's absence was an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. When Cindy finally found Casey's abandoned car at a tow yard, she made the call that launched a national obsession. On the 911 recording, her voice cracks with a horror she can barely articulate. She says, "There is something wrong. I found my daughter's car today and it smells like there has been a dead body in the damn car." Casey was brought in for questioning, and the lies began. She told detectives that Kaylee was with a nanny, a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, Zanny for short. She gave an address. She gave details. She led investigators on a chase through her fabrications with the confidence of someone who believed she could talk her way out of anything. But Zanny the nanny did not exist. The address was wrong. The entire story was a construction, a desperate attempt to buy time, to maintain the illusion, to delay the moment when the truth would surface. Kaylee's remains were found in December 2008 in a wooded area less than a mile from the Anthony home. The body was badly decomposed. Duct tape was found near the skull. The forensic evidence pointed to homicide, but the how and why remained contested. The 2011 trial became a national event. Cable news devoted entire programming blocks to courtroom footage. Spectators lined up for seats. The prosecution presented Casey as a young mother who wanted freedom more than she wanted her daughter, a woman who saw her child as an obstacle to the party lifestyle she craved. The defense countered with a different narrative entirely. Kaylee had drowned accidentally in the family pool. Casey, traumatized and conditioned by a dysfunctional family to hide problems rather than face them, panicked and covered up the death rather than reporting it. The duct tape, the lies, the bizarre behavior, all of it the result of a young woman incapable of processing tragedy, not a calculating killer. And then came the verdict. Not guilty on the major charges, not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter, guilty only of lying to investigators, a charge that carried minimal time, most of which she had already served. The public reaction was volcanic. Crowds outside the courthouse screamed in disbelief. Social media erupted. Casey Anthony became, overnight, one of the most hated figures in America. Not because the jury declared her guilty, but because the legal system's verdict failed to match the public's emotional certainty. To this day, this case refuses to close. A child is dead. A mother is free. The truth remains permanently out of reach, buried somewhere between the lies told to police, the stories told in court, and the silence of a little girl who can never tell us what happened. Case 7. Megan Huntsman. The boxes in the garage. This final case is chilling, not because of a dramatic trial or a media frenzy. It is chilling because of its scale, its secrecy, and the incomprehensible question it forces us to ask. Pleasant Grove, Utah. A quiet town. A woman who seems, by all external measures, unremarkable. A house. A garage filled with the usual clutter of a long-occupied home. In 2014, Megan Huntsman's estranged husband was cleaning out that garage, going through boxes that had accumulated over years, opening things that had been taped shut and forgotten. Inside one box, he found something that did not belong in a garage. Something that did not belong anywhere. He called the police. They searched. More boxes, more discoveries. By the end of the day, investigators had recovered the remains of 7 infants. 7. Megan Huntsman confessed. Over a period spanning nearly a decade, from 1996 to 2006, she had concealed pregnancies, given birth in secret, and killed the newborns shortly after they took their first breaths. Then she wrapped them, placed them in boxes, and stored them in the garage. And life continued. Her husband did not know. Her other children did not know. The house functioned. Holidays were celebrated. Meals were cooked. And a few feet away, behind stacked boxes and forgotten clutter, the evidence of repeated infanticide waited in the darkness. Her stated motive was bleak and simple: addiction, the belief that she could not handle more children, the conviction that concealment was easier than confrontation. But the question that haunts everyone who encounters this case is not about motive. It is about mechanism. How does someone compartmentalize to this degree? How do you carry a pregnancy to term, deliver a child, end its life, box the remains, and then continue existing as if nothing happened, not once, but 7 times? This is not a crime of passion. It is not a single moment of snapping. It is repetition. It is choice, made again and again over a decade. It is the construction of a secret so heavy it should collapse under its own weight, yet somehow does not. And it forces us to confront something we would rather not acknowledge. The human capacity for compartmentalization has no obvious limit. The mind can section off horrors and continue functioning. The self we present to the world can be separated completely from the self that exists in the garage after midnight. That is what makes this case uniquely disturbing. Not the violence itself, but the ordinary life that continued alongside it. These 7 stories aren't all the same. Some are driven by obsession with a man who didn't want children. Some by the hunger for attention that social media can amplify into addiction. Some by belief systems that twisted faith into permission for annihilation. And some by a compartmentalization so extreme it defies comprehension. But they all share one terrifying thread that binds them together. They show how easily a role can become a disguise. The grieving mother on television, begging for the safe return of children she has already drowned. The devoted caregiver, performing sacrifice while manufacturing illness. The woman of faith, using the language of righteousness to justify destroying her own family. The online hero, documenting her child's suffering while causing it. And when the disguise works, when the performance is convincing, the world doesn't just get fooled. It participates. We donate. We share. We defend. We accuse strangers who don't exist. We organize search parties for children who are already dead. We build houses for abusers and call them saints. We let the real danger stay close to home, because the real danger doesn't look like what we've been taught to fear. These cases don't just reveal the capacity for evil in unexpected places. They reveal our own vulnerability to deception, our willingness to believe in the roles people perform, our deep need to trust that mothers are safe. And perhaps that's the most disturbing lesson of all. If you found value in this examination of how evil hides behind the faces we trust most, consider subscribing to Evil Minds. Dwell here. This channel exists to look into the darkness, not to celebrate it, but to understand it. Because understanding is the only defense we have.